Hello, hi, and welcome to another installment of the Soulful Restoration podcast with me, Lyric the Curator. Before we get started, I need to start with letting you know what to do, the basics, like, subscribe, share, comment. We've been seeing your comments coming through, and personally, I have a lag, but I will respond to you. That's guaranteed. So don't be shy. Those in the DMs, I see you. And I'm really thrilled that we are doing the work. At the end of the day, this is just about you doing your work. So today, as a launching pad to the discussion of the day, I want to take a step back and do a quick recap of what we've done to this point. This is also for the benefit of those who are joining us for the first time. We are in a series titled My Place in the World. This is the first series of the Soulful Restoration podcast, and we are delving into ourselves. Our objective with this series is for us to really look inward, to find our place in the world, to make sense of ourselves, to ourselves, and to understand what counts, what doesn't, what matters, what doesn't. All, in the name of self-actualization. Because when all is said and done, all we want to do is to get to the end of our existence, having known why we existed to begin with. So at the beginning of the season, we started off with acknowledging and defining the roots of your identity. In that episode, we said acknowledging the roots of your identity is important because no one is born into a void or a vacuum. We are all born into history. And understanding that history is important to make sense of why things are the way they are, and to also make sense of where you fit in the greater scope of life. We said history doesn't have to define you, but your ignorance of history can actually harm you because you don't know what you carry. You don't know where your family stems from. You don't understand today because you have no context of yesterday. And then we moved on. And we spoke about overcoming circumstantial identity. In that episode, we said circumstantial identity is a camouflage you put on at a point in your life as a defense mechanism or survival tactic. And you keep on longer than you should have, so long that you can't differentiate it from yourself. It's all the masks, the facades, the jackets we put on every day to fit in, to block out pain, to dominate spaces and people. And we said those actually block us from finding our authentic self. Our key takeaway there was the reward of showing up as your authentic self will always be greater than the perceived safety of living in the shadows. We then advanced to decision-making in an episode we titled The Fork, Free to Choose, Tied to Consequence. And in this episode, we used the metaphor of the fork in a road to pause and reflect on how we make decisions, how we think and consider things, what makes us do certain things or not, what makes us proactive and reactive. Our key takeaway there was you are always free to choose. Choice is yours, but you are tied to the consequences they bring. Our second takeaway was decision-making is a skill, and you get better at it with practice. And our last takeaway was that it is important for you to take stock of who has influence over your decisions and what has influence over your decisions. Because whomever or whatever has your ear has your life. Whoever has your ear has your life. And I wanted to just double click on this little thought and expand on it, which is what has yielded today's episode. Whoever has your ear has your life. So who has your ear? Who do you consider fundamental and instrumental in the governance of your life? These are questions we will seek to explain and expand on in this episode, but it's also something you should consider for yourself daily. A great deal of us have outsourced parts of our lives and responsibilities to pretty much anyone and anything that comes across because we don't like responsibility. It's easier to just get on with the blend, failing to realize that some of the things that we go through in life will be far beyond the personal experiences of the people we have outsourced our lives to. We burden people with unspoken and unfair expectations that they can never fulfill as a means of deflecting off our responsibility to ourselves and our lives. We want people to fix parts of us that only God can fix. We keep ourselves occupied with anything and everything just so we don't have to listen to the deafening noise of silence. But it is in that silence that you will find feeling, healing, and eventually yourself. It is in that silence that you will uncover the reality of your divinity. And it is in that silence that you will find God. And so if you haven't guessed it already, today's topic is finding your God. From the beginning of time, Black people were given a certain way of life by the God of our ancestors. This way of life was passed on from past ancestors for the benefit of future generations. This way of life became a pattern over time that we've come to know as culture, and it embodied itself in their lifestyle, traditions, rituals, and customs. So from the inception, the beginning of time, God, ancestors, man, culture, nature, and land were all intertwined. And these entities should be in harmony with each other, because any imbalance in this relationship creates a spiritual misalignment, and then problems begin. And boy, oh boy, do we have problems. We live in a world where we outsource the responsibility of seeking out solutions to the very people who have created the problems. A world where a person will hold the Holy Bible in one hand while stabbing another fellow human with the other hand. A world where principles and values are deemed suggestions and not life essentials. And we live a world where we think a pulpit is anointing and anyone who stands behind it is anointed. A world where we miss signs and bury symbols. A world where we mistake the teacher for the curriculum. And in this moment, I want us, in fact, I'm urging you to take a step back and go back to the curriculum and study it for yourself. And the curriculum I'm referring to is divinity. There are many elements of divinity that have been misrepresented as demonic or completely dismissed because of either miseducation or a lack of understanding. But today I want us to focus on you finding God. And I emphasize on the notion of finding God for yourself because you cannot operate in the spirit of a borrowed God. And there's plenty of evidence to this effect. For one, I think about how many times people sort of like fall by the wayside as soon as the spiritual leader is brought into disrepute. And the question then is, if you dismiss the whole notion and relationship of God because of another person's, let's call it missteps, then who are you worshipping to begin with? And then there are those who consider going to church or a house of worship as being one with God. Whereas in that case, you're pretty much just confusing proximity with dwelling. You're in the neighborhood, but you're not in a house. And unfortunately, your delusion will not shelter you from the rain. God cannot be a lingering study that you dabble in every now and then by accident or when the chips are down. He has to be an integral part of who you are. So I want us to go back to the principle. I want us to go back to truth. I would love for each and every one of us to experience the love and splendor of God. I would love for us to sit around a table and exchange stories of the wonders and splendor of the spiritual realm with no fear and the utmost respect and admiration. But in order for that to happen, We each need to bring something to the table. And this is not the kind of homework that you can copy from your friend. It is solely up to you. And to a certain extent, it's uncharted waters. Now, I can hear some of you saying it can't be uncharted waters because God's always been. He's always been there. There are testimonies, there are witnesses to that effect. And I agree with you on the latter. But you have never journeyed with God in this lifetime. And even if you have been journeying with God, you'll agree with me that how he shows up in your life today is significantly different to how he showed up a couple of years ago or even yesterday. There's a continuous evolution in the spiritual realm, and if you're not constantly in tune, you'll miss the subtle changes in its frequency, which is why I consider it fundamental that each person discovers God for themselves. Because in matters of divinity, personal experience will always outweigh observation. You need to press into your divinity and discover your method of connecting with God. You need to make sense of God and how he talks to you and understand the signs and symbols he shows to you because they are unique to you. You need to know his voice and be able to differentiate it from your own. The problem we have is that we think most of the high level connectedness to God is only for a select few or just them, not me. And for some reason, the select few is never you. Like, how does that work? Like, you think something is for a select number of people, but somehow you just never make the cut. But I want you to know that that level of connectedness and intimacy is for anyone and everyone who is willing to be still, ask, listen, discern, and obey. And yes, you'll definitely get teachers along the way. There's nothing wrong with that. There are people you can look up to, people you can ask questions to, listen to, take advice from. But remember that the teacher should point you to the curriculum, just like a billboard points you to a destination. You don't park by the road and call the destination and call the road sign the destination. Yet we do that a lot with spiritual teachers. That's where the breakdown is. We mistake the teacher for the discipline, and in so doing, we make the teacher God. Learn to listen to that small inner voice within you. That's your guide to the way. God is both the center and pillar of everything. Without him, there is nothing. With him, there is everything. He has no beginning and no ending. He's continuous. He is beyond our human comprehension, and yet he is not somewhere in the clouds. He is the divinity in all of us. He wants us to find him in ourselves. This is why I think that scripture is complete in principle, but not exhaustive in example. And the risk we run is that we become fixated on the examples and never grasp the principles. Yet it is the principles that we need to apply in our everyday lives. It's kind of like math. At some point, we were taught Bodmas. Like if you were I think every kid actually gets taught Bodmas. Bodmas is the order of operations, right? So brackets of division, multiplication, addition, subtraction. Yeah, they gave it a little acronym. And all it does is tell you the order in which you should solve a mathematical equation, like what comes first in you solving that particular sum. And when our teachers teach us this, they will use an example and say, this is how you use Bodmas. They'll obviously start by explaining what it is, and then they'll show us how to use it. But come at the test, the sums we get are totally different, from the example we had got. But the principle stays the same. If you apply Bodmas the way you were taught, you will get the right answer. The same works in the spiritual realm, and God works the same way. He gives us an order of operation, principles to govern life and living. But we retain free will. we still have the choice to choose not to abide. But we always pay the price for that. I know some of you will also say, but if there's a God, then why is there so much evil in the world? Well, for one, most of that evil is man-made, free will. And even if we do consider natural disasters, which are termed acts of God, they don't wipe out nearly as many people as we wipe out by our own hand. Arguably, even some of the disasters that we have are a response or a result of our own doing as mankind. We have free will, but finding God and tapping into your divinity will enable you to align your free will to your faith. That's when you choose to do things in obedience to your call and from the understanding of worship. Now, some of you might also be triggered by the word worship. Like, oh my gosh, worship. Past experiences flash before your eyes. So let me address church hurt real quick. I won't be long on this one. If you've ever experienced church hurt, remember that man, not God, did you wrong. I'm not saying go back to church. I'm not saying don't go back to church. I'm simply saying don't let a bad church experience be your God experience. God is far greater than any avenue that leads us to Him. That's why I'm not really concerned with the methods we employ to keep ourselves in check. They're really a non-starter for me. I mean, if you choose to pray for facing a certain direction or wearing a certain garment or at this or that day, okay, that's cool. It works for you. It may not work for the next person, but that can never replace the posture of your heart. The posture and purity of your heart are the most important aspects when it comes to the work of God in your life. I think we focus a lot on salvation, and that's okay, but we don't do nearly enough on encouraging and scoping out living well. And living well means living under the guidance and counsel of God. It is living in unison with creation. It is living in a way that not only honors your Creator, but redeems your bloodline. You are born into history with a purpose, also known as the reason for your existence. Some of us are lucky enough to be born into communities that pay attention to us and guide us along our path. Not paths they create for us, but paths that are aligned to our reason for existence. Some of us are not that lucky. You have to sort of figure it out when you start being an adult. But God evens the playing field for all of us. He holds your hand and guides you through life. He has given us unlimited potential, but He holds the key to every door possible. And all we have to do is grab the key, open the doors, and then be wise enough to listen to the counsel on how to walk through those doors. He wants us to learn and be full of life and knowledge. God is all-encompassing, and drawing nearer to Him puts you in a position to view all the mysteries and wonders of His hands. Okay, last example, and then I'm done. Then we call it a day. There was a sitcom back in the day, called Mr. Bean. And there was this one scene where Mr. Bean goes to write an exam. So Gent goes to write his exam. He gets to the exam room early. He takes out, all his writing stuff. He strikes me like the guy to bring a calculator to an English exam, But anyway, he gets there, takes out his thing, he's ready. He's sharpening his pencils, life is good. And then he waits. Then another gentleman comes and sits across from him on the same table. So he's on one end and then Mr. Bean on the other. And they hand out the exam papers in a little envelope. And then it's time to start the exam. And they start the exam, they opens the envelope and he takes out a white sheet and that's the exam paper. And he looks at the exam paper and you can see the life drain out of his face. He's confuzzled, if that's a word. because nothing on this paper makes sense. He looks at it, up and down, and then he looks at his neighbor, and the guy's flying through that exam. Okay, that man is like writing, and Mr. Bean is thinking, I don't know the first thing on this paper. So, like the good student that he is, he's like, okay, I got a plan. I'm just going to look at what my neighbor is doing and then get a few answers. Maybe I'll pass this thing. So he does everything in his mind. Homie is like throwing his pens on the floor just so you can pick them up closer to the neighbor, just so you can just like, what's happening? Maybe I'll see a C and then tick my C. But the guy sitting across from him is wise, Must be a strict, like he knows what's happening. He can see Mr. Bean trying the stunt. So like the diligent student that he is, he covers his work. You used to do it. You'd cover your work when you see someone's coming. You're like, no, I'm on top, lie down, I'm writing. That's what that guy does. And Mr. Bean obviously eventually just like gives up and he starts like having a little breakdown. And then he cries, like shortly though, very briefly. And then he lies down and he's like, I give up. It is what it is. Take my L, keep it moving. So he sleeps. And then 5 minutes before the session ends, the invigilator says, okay, can all the people that wrote the white exam, please put your white papers and your script on this side of the room. The ones that had the blue papers, put it on this side of the room. Mr. Bean wakes up and he's like, blue paper? Like, where was the blue paper? And he looks frantically in the envelope. And there it is. Lo and behold, blue exam in the envelope. And that's the exam he knew. That is the exam he knew. And obviously time was up. Like, imagine the frustration. In that 1 minute, he's like writing frantically because that's the exam he knew. How many of us spend our lives, like Mr. Bean, staring at the wrong exam paper or trying to copy from the next person while we have a totally different paper in front of us? Why don't you ask the person who gave you your exam what the answers are? Unlike Mr. Bean's invigilator, your invigilator, God can give you tips on how to do this thing. We might be in the same exam room called life, but we're definitely not writing the same paper. And the mistake we make is thinking that we are. The paper that you've gotten, which is your life, is the one that has been designed for you. Let the one who gave you this life guide you through it. God is not limited to our definitions or labels or what we think or what we've heard, but our comprehension of Him is important in our comprehension of life and our understanding of our purpose in this life. So, like I said, that was my last example for the day. But I want to thank you for sticking around to this part of the episode. May the specks of light that shine through the cracks of darkness remind you that all is not lost. Better days are coming. Guard your heart, nurture your soul, and renew your mind. Till we meet again, take care of yourself, take care of those around you, and that which surrounds you. Bye for now. Cut! Favorite part. We done.